Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a really critical topic in preventing financial crime, the role of gatekeepers.
That's right. A role that seems to be getting increasingly vital.
Definitely. We're looking at an excerpt, right, from FinCrime Intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. It really unpacks the concept, you know, who these gatekeepers actually are,
Hmm.
why they matter so much more today, and what's expected of them.
Okay, so our mission here is to really cut through that and give you the essentials. We want to figure out what makes these folks so important in stopping dirty money, ideally before it even gets into the system.
Yeah, it's about looking beyond, just the banks, understanding those other access points criminals try to use.
And the people who are actually in a position to spot trouble.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we say gatekeepers, who are we actually talking about here? It sounds a bit, well, literal.
Right. Or you might immediately think of people inside banks. And sure, banks are definitely gatekeepers. But this source really stresses how much that definition has broadened out. It's not just the financial sector anymore.
And that's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it? Because the criminals are looking for those other routes.
Precisely. So now we're talking about a pretty wide range of non-financial professionals and institutions.
Okay.
People you might deal with maybe without even thinking about their role in, preventing financial crime.
Like who? Give us some examples from the source.
Well, the list is quite revealing about where the vulnerabilities lie. It includes accountants and auditors,
Okay.
lawyers and notaries, real estate agents and developers,
Mm-hmm.
trust and company service providers, TCSPs, they're often called.
Right, the ones setting up structures.
Exactly. And even dealers in high-value goods. Think art, precious metals, luxury cars.
Wow, okay. That is much broader than just, Wall Street types.
So, given this wider group, why are they becoming so absolutely critical now?
Well, it's because criminals adapt, don't they? If the banks tighten up defenses, the illicit money looks for other ways in.
Makes sense. And these non-financial gatekeepers, they control the access points criminals need to make dirty money look legitimate before it even gets near a bank account or an investment.
Ah, okay. So they're being used to create that veneer of legitimacy further upstream.
Perfectly put. That's why they're increasingly seen as the first line of defense. They're crucial before the money even moves financially because they handle the things criminals use to hide it, setting up companies, handling property deals, structuring things.
Got it. So if they are this first line, what are their actual duties according to the source? What are they supposed to do to stop this stuff early on?
It lays out several key responsibilities. The big one is performing due diligence,
Okay.
which means really digging in, understanding who you're dealing with, especially when you're setting up complex things like companies, trusts, or handling big property sales. It's not just surface level stuff.
Really knowing your client?
Exactly. Verifying client identity, those know your customer. KYC checks, absolutely fundamental. And it's not just who they are, but also assessing the source of funds and wealth, especially for big or complicated deals. Where did this money actually come from?
Right, you can't just take a massive pile of cash, no questions asked.
Definitely not. Then, a really critical duty. If they see something that looks off, something suspicious, they need to report it.
Report it where?
Usually to the country's Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, often through what's called a Suspicious Transaction Report, or STR, basically raising a flag to the authorities.
Okay, sounding the alarm when something doesn't feel right.
Yes. And maybe one of the toughest duties, sometimes the obligation to actually refuse or terminate business relationships. If the risk seems too high or you just can't get comfortable with it, sometimes walking away is the required step.
And the source mentions the consequences if they fail in these duties.
Oh, absolutely. If they fail, their services can become the pipeline for really serious stuff.
Yeah.
Money laundering, tax evasion, sanctions busting, corruption. Their failure directly enables crime.
Right. These duties, they sound very much like things rooted in formal rules. How do regulations fit into this picture?
They're completely central. National and international regulations are increasingly putting strict anti-money laundering AML and counter-terrorist financing CTF obligations right onto these gatekeepers.
It's not just good practice, it's the law. What kind of regulations are we talking about?
The source points to a few big ones. You've got the FATF recommendations, that's the global standard setter.
Right.
They specifically target what they call designated non-financial businesses and professions, or DNFBPs, which is exactly who we're talking about.
Okay.
Then you have things like the EU AML directives, which mandate due diligence and reporting for lawyers, auditors, estate agents across Europe.
Hmm.
In the U.S., the Bank Secrecy Act also covers certain non-bank entities. And you also see guidance from bodies like the UNODC pushing for professional standards and information sharing.
So it's a clear global trend, and these rules expect more than just ticking boxes, I assume?
Exactly. It's not just about performing the checks mechanically. The expectation is that they genuinely understand the client, their business, the context, the overall risk profile.
But, despite all these rules and expectations, things still go wrong. Where are the common weak spots? How do criminals still manage to exploit these gatekeepers?
Yeah, let's talk about how they can become part of the problem, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not.
Right.
The source highlights a few common scenarios. One classic is creating anonymous shell companies, or really complex corporate structures with layers upon layers, all designed to hide who really owns the assets.
Obscuring the beneficial owner.
Precisely. And gatekeepers like TCSPs or lawyers involved in setting up companies could be, well, key to making that happen.
I see. What else?
Another big one is complex real estate deals. Property is just a magnet for money laundering because large sums can be moved and deals can be structured to hide where the money really came from.
Right. Washing money through property.
Exactly. Also, holding client money in trust accounts without enough scrutiny can create a sort of temporary black box for funds,
A hiding place, essentially.
pretty much. And then there's the human factor, what the source calls willful blindness.
Ah, deliberately looking the other way.
Sort of choosing to ignore red flags that are pretty obvious. This might be more common where enforcement seems weak, low risk of getting caught.
Okay.
And a really practical issue, especially for, say, smaller firms or solo practitioners, is simply a lack of good internal training or compliance systems. They might not have the resources or know-how.
Right. Not enough capacity.
Yeah. And the source makes an important point. This exploitation can be knowing where the gatekeeper is actually complicit or unknowing, just down to negligence or weak controls.
So either helping intentionally or just not being careful enough. Given these risks, how can things be tightened up? What does the source say about strengthening oversight?
It really emphasizes structured controls.
Ugh.
First off, having written AML/CTF policies and procedures,
Yep.
and not just generic ones, but tailored to their specific business and risks.
Makes sense.
Then, implementing risk-based customer due diligence. This means doing more checking, enhanced diligence for higher-risk clients,
Like who?
like politically exposed persons,
Oh,
PPs,
yeah.
or clients from high-risk industries or countries. Basically, more risk means more scrutiny.
So scale the effort to the risk.
Exactly. And compliance isn't just a one-off check at the start. You need ongoing monitoring of what your clients are doing throughout the relationship.
Keep an eye on things.
Absolutely. Regular mandatory AML training for all staff is crucial. Everyone needs to know what to look for. And having clear escalation protocols,
Meaning?
meaning everyone knows exactly how and to whom they should report something if they spot a red flag internally, making sure concerns actually go somewhere.
Right, so it doesn't just get stuck.
Yes. The source also mentions the value of things like public-private partnerships, sharing information about new criminal methods or typologies.
Learning from each other.
Exactly. And critically, the role of the supervisory bodies, the bar associations, the accountancy regulators, real estate boards, etc.
Ah, the professional bodies themselves.
Yes, they need to be auditing compliance among their members, setting ethical standards, and frankly, applying pressure and enforcement when needed.
This brings us to a point. The source really stresses near the end that this is about more than just ticking regulatory boxes.
It really is. It talks about the broader fiduciary and societal responsibility these professionals have. It's not just about following rules. It's about the integrity of their profession.
Their actions matter for the whole system.
Hugely. Their integrity helps protect the financial system itself, uphold the rule of law, promote fair business. They're in this incredibly unique position.
Guardians of the entry points, almost.
That's a great way to put it. Because they're involved in creating legal structures, enabling big transactions, they have this unique power and therefore responsibility to stop financial crime at its source.
Before it even gets laundered through the banks or investments.
Exactly, before it gets properly integrated.
Okay, so if we zoom out from this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for you, the listener?
Well, gatekeepers, that term covers a much wider group than just banks now. Think accountants, lawyers, real estate agents, TCSPs, high-value dealers.
And they're positioned as this critical first line of defense against financial crime. They have clear duties backed by regulations, things like due diligence, verifying identity, checking source of funds, reporting suspicion.
Hmm. But they also face real vulnerabilities. Criminals trying to use shell companies, complex properties, sometimes exploiting willful blindness or just weak internal controls.
Which is why having robust procedures, ongoing training, strong oversight from professional bodies, it's all essential.
Understanding this whole gatekeeper role helps you see a crucial part of how the system tries, or is supposed to try, to keep illicit funds out. It highlights why the integrity of these professions is just so fundamentally important.
Absolutely. It maintains trust in our economic systems. So, thinking about that idea, this first line of defense, their power to stop crime right at the source, what does it really take? What combination of rules, oversight, technology, and maybe most importantly, individual ethical commitment is needed for that line to actually hold strong against criminals who are always finding new ways? Something for you to think about.